The sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer on young Jethro. 13 years of dust and silence had carved deep lines into his young face, lines that mirrored the cracked earth around him. He gripped the worn leather reins, the horse's rhythmic hoofbeats a mournful counterpoint to his own quiet desperation. His mother's last whisper, a name half spoken, half sobbed, had sent him westward, chasing a ghost. Hollow Creek. Find him, Jethro. Find what was lost. The words had been a riddle wrapped in her dying breath, a burden heavier than any saddlebag. He rode towards a town he didn't know, to find a man he couldn't remember. The landscape stretched, vast and unforgiving, mirroring the emptiness in his chest. A lone buzzard circled high above, a dark omen in the endless blue. Jethro pulled the brim of his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the glare, but not from the persistent ache that gnawed at him. He carried no grand map, only a faded tintype. A man with kind eyes and a faint, unreadable smile, his mother's most guarded treasure. "Your father," she'd said, her voice thin as parchment. He'd never known his father, only the gaping void his absence left. Hollow Creek emerged from the shimmering heat like a mirage, a cluster of weathered wooden buildings, a single church steeple piercing the sky. Dust devils danced in the main street, swirling like secrets. The air hung thick with the scent of dry earth, horse sweat, and something else, a lingering sense of unspoken history. He dismounted, his legs stiff, his heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The silence here was different, not the peaceful quiet of the open range, but a heavy, watchful silence. Eyes followed him from shadowed doorways, quick, appraising glances. He was an outsider, and they knew it. He walked past the saloon, its doors creaking like weary sighs, past the general store, its windows clouded with dust. He felt the weight of their gaze, the unspoken questions. He sought out the undertaker, a stoic man with hands gnarled like old roots, his face a map of sorrow. Jethro laid the tintype on the counter. The undertaker's eyes, dulled by years of witnessing grief, sharpened slightly. He picked up the photo, his thumb tracing the faint outline of the man's face. A long pause, filled only by the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. Jericho. The name was a whisper, a stone dropped into a still well. "He's buried up on Boot Hill." The undertaker's gaze held a strange mixture of pity and something akin to accusation. "Died some years back." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer comfort. Jethro felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The man's brevity spoke volumes. Jethro rode the short distance to Boot Hill, a desolate rise overlooking the town. The wind sang a mournful tune through the sparse, gnarled trees. Graves were scattered haphazardly, some marked with crude wooden crosses, others with carefully carved stones. He walked slowly, his boots crunching on the dry grass, his eyes scanning, searching. The names on the headstones blurred until one caught his eye, standing apart, stark and defiant. Jericho Stone. The name struck him like a physical blow. The stone was smooth, well-tended, almost out of place amidst the forgotten dead. And beneath the name, etched in bold, unwavering letters, were two words that shattered the silence of his world. Died a hero. A hero. The words echoed in his mind, a jarring contrast to the heavy silence and the undertaker's veiled comments. He knelt, his fingers tracing the chiseled letters. This was his father. This was the man his mother had loved, the man whose absence had shaped his entire life. A hero. The thought was a fragile thing, a tendril of hope in a world that had offered little. He felt a tear track a path through the dust on his cheek, a silent testament to the years of unspoken longing. He stayed there until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and regret. The next morning, the words, "died a hero," still burned in Jethro's mind. They were a beacon, a promise, a challenge. He walked back into town, his stride more purposeful. He needed answers. He started at the saloon, the only place where stories, however distorted, flowed as freely as cheap whiskey. The air was thick with smoke and the clatter of poker chips. He approached the bar, a quiet boy in a loud world. The bartender, a burly man with a scarred face, eyed him suspiciously. "I'm looking for someone who knew Jericho Stone," Jethro said, his voice surprisingly steady. The bartender's hand paused as he wiped down the counter. A hush fell over the room, as if a sudden gust of wind had snuffed out every conversation. All eyes turned to Jethro, a dozen sets of hard, unyielding gazes. The weight of their scrutiny pressed down on him, heavier than any physical burden. "You the boy?" a voice rasped from a shadowed corner. An old man, his face a road map of wrinkles, pushed himself away from a table, his eyes glinting with a strange mix of sorrow and bitterness. "You the one his woman carried off?" Jethro nodded, a knot forming in his throat. "He ain't no hero, boy," the old man spat, his voice laced with venom. "Your pa was an outlaw, a thief and a murderer, left a trail of blood and broken lives. Hollow Creek remembers." The words struck Jethro with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted. Outlaw, thief, murderer. The words were a stark, brutal contrast to the shining declaration on the headstone. He felt a cold dread spread through him, chilling him to the bone. His father? An outlaw? It couldn't be. Not the man in the tintype, not the man his mother had loved so deeply. Other voices joined in, a chorus of condemnation. "He rode with the devil's hand," a man grumbled, taking a swig from his glass. "Killed the sheriff, stole the payroll," another added. "Left folks ruined, deserved what he got." Each word was a shard of glass, tearing at his fragile understanding. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the shame of his father's alleged crimes had been branded onto his own skin. He wanted to scream, to deny, to lash out at their accusations, but the words caught in his throat. He stumbled out of the saloon, the glares of the townsfolk burning into his back. The bright sun now seemed harsh, unforgiving. The air, once filled with the promise of answers, now felt thick with judgment. He walked aimlessly, the accusations echoing in his head. The weight of the town's collective memory was suffocating. He saw it in their eyes. Not just disdain, but fear, resentment, a deep-seated grievance that time had not healed. He found himself drawn to the sheriff's office, a small, unassuming building at the end of the street. He pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling mournfully. Inside, a man sat hunched over a ledger, his face etched with weariness. He looked up, his eyes the color of a winter sky, holding a deep sorrow. "Can I help you, son?" Garrett's voice was low, gentle, a stark contrast to the harsh pronouncements in the saloon. They say my father was an outlaw," Jethro choked out, the words catching in his throat. "Jericho Stone." Garrett's gaze softened. He pushed the ledger aside, his fingers lacing together. "So, you're Jericho's boy." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. "It's true, what they say. He rode with a bad crowd, the devil's hand. Did some bad things. Killed my predecessor, Sheriff Sterling." The finality in Garrett's voice left no room for doubt. Jethro felt his world crumble. His father a killer. The hero on the headstone was a lie. His mother's whispered name, a cruel deception. The pain was sharp, an ache that permeated his very bones. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just by the town, but by the memory of a father he had never known, by a mother who had kept such a devastating truth hidden. But the headstone, Jethro whispered, his voice barely audible. "It says he died a hero." He looked at Garrett, his eyes pleading for an explanation, for a shred of solace in the wreckage of his hopes. Garrett sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He rose and walked to a dusty shelf, picking up a faded photograph. It showed a stern-faced man in his sheriff's uniform, his gaze unwavering. Sheriff Sterling, good man. He believed in redemption, even for the worst of them. He placed the photo back on the shelf, turning to face Jethro. "Jericho, he made a choice. The devil's hand was set to hit the bank. Sterling got wind of it. He rode out alone to confront them. Told no one. Jericho, he rode with him that day. But something in him changed. He saw the faces of the townsfolk, the fear in their eyes. Saw Sterling standing alone, ready to die to protect him." Garrett paused, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "They say Jericho turned on his own, fought him off, saved the town. Sterling was caught in the crossfire, died right there. But not before he saw what Jericho did. Sterling's last breath was a plea to the town, a declaration that Jericho had saved them. He asked that the town remember Jericho, not for the past, but for his final act." Jethro listened, his breath caught in his throat. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, began to coalesce, forming a picture far more complex than he could have imagined. His father wasn't simply a hero, nor merely an outlaw. He was both, a man caught between two worlds who, in his final moments, chose redemption. The town, they weren't ready to forgive. Too much pain, too many losses. They buried Sterling with honors, and Jericho, they buried him on Boot Hill, and they put that on his stone. Because Sterling, he was a man of his word. But the town, they still saw the outlaw. Jethro felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief, sorrow, a strange kind of pride. His father had been a good man, or had become one in the end. He had made a choice that cost him his life, but saved a town. The bitterness of the townsfolk, their refusal to acknowledge his final act, was a testament to the depth of their wounds, but it no longer diminished the truth for Jethro. The truth, when it came, was not a simple, clean thing. It was messy, painful, tinged with regret and shadowed by the ghost of past deeds. Jethro spent the next few days in Hollow Creek, not seeking more answers, but simply observing, listening to the subtle currents of the town. He saw the lingering fear in the eyes of the shopkeepers, the guarded expressions of the mothers watching their children play. He understood now that forgiveness was a slow-growing plant, and for some, it might never bloom. He visited his father's grave each morning, the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, illuminating the words, "Died a hero." Now he understood the weight of those words, the silent defiance they represented. They were not a lie, but a testament to a final act of courage, a flicker of light in a shadowed life. He cleaned the headstone, wiping away the accumulated dust, revealing the stark white of the marble. He felt a connection to his father, a bond forged not in memory, but in this newfound understanding. One afternoon, as he sat by the grave, a young woman approached, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her face was gentle, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. She knelt beside a nearby grave, tending to it with tender care. Jethro watched her, a silent observer. She looked up, her gaze meeting his. "You're Jericho's boy," she said, her voice soft, devoid of judgment. "I'm Ilara. Sheriff Sterling was my grandfather." Jethro stiffened, expecting condemnation, but her eyes held only understanding. "He spoke of your father," Ilara continued, her voice a low murmur. "He said Jericho was a man lost, but not without hope. He said your father found his way back, in the end. He saved us all." She picked up a small stone and placed it on her grandfather's grave, a silent gesture of remembrance. "My grandfather believed that true heroism isn't about never falling,
but about getting up, even when it cost you everything. Her words were a balm to Jethro's wounded soul. This was the other side of the story, the quiet truth held by those who understood the complexities of the human heart. Ilara's presence was a gift, a confirmation that not everyone in Hollow Creek held on to the bitterness of the past. He left Hollow Creek a few days later, the morning air crisp and clean. He carried no grand fortune, no definitive proof that would sway the town's hardened opinions, but he carried something far more valuable, the truth. A truth that was intricate, painful, and ultimately redemptive. His father wasn't simply a hero or a simple outlaw. He was a man who had made terrible mistakes, but who in his final moments had chosen a path of courage and sacrifice. As he rode away, he looked back at Hollow Creek, the small cluster of buildings shrinking in the distance. The memories of the townsfolk's scorn still lingered, but they were now overshadowed by the quiet understanding he had found. He thought of his mother, her dying wish, her unwavering faith. She knew the truth, perhaps not the full story, but the essence of his father's final act. She had sent him here not to find a perfect hero, but to discover the complicated, beautiful truth of a man's last stand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the faded tintype. The man in the photograph still had kind eyes, but now Jethro saw the weight of his past in their depths, and the faint, unreadable smile now seemed to hold a hint of hard-won peace. He tucked the photo back into his pocket, a silent promise to carry his father's memory not as a burden of shame, but as a testament to the enduring power of redemption. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Jethro rode on, his heart a little lighter, carrying the profound weight of a truth that he had earned, a truth that had finally set him free. The dust of the past settled behind him, and the vast open sky stretched out before him, a canvas for the future. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.